Well, let's get started. First of all, I had a chance to read through what you guys wrote for quiz one. I thought it was pretty interesting. I had a couple of duplicates, actually. Two people like The Last Supper by Leonardo, and the third one like The Last Supper by Castagno. And let's see, three Raphaels, but three different paintings: Galatia, Madonna in the Meadow, and Primavera. And let's see, a couple of you liked Albert Bierstadt, Sierra Nevadas, that landscape, American Romanticism. Anyway, and Lucy, you like Hieronymus Bosch. I love that painting too. It's really, we'll talk about all of these, but the Hieronymus Bosch, and I think we're going to come up to it here pretty soon. It's really, in a lot of ways, it's extremely important because it influences a lot of surrealist artists of the 20th century. So anyway, we'll talk about that. But anyway, I enjoyed it. I didn't put any grades on any of this. I liked it. But I don't have them all in, by the way. But I want to put something together and talk about them on Wednesday. And it kind of went a different direction than I thought it would, but it's all good. So right now, I want to talk to you about the High Renaissance in Italy. And I showed you the first two artists who get that distinction of being members of the High Renaissance: Leonardo, Raphael, and the third one, Michelangelo. And so, I'm gonna get this to move off. Give me some more space. I need that to move up. There we go. I showed you a previous sculpture of Moses. Do you remember when I told you about the horns? This is Michelangelo. And he puts horns on in a pretty major way. Let me zoom in on this. Horns, again, translated, an error in translation from the Old Greek, but at any rate, Michelangelo was a sculptor. He was from Florence, and this guy here, Pope Julius II, summoned him to Rome, and he spent the rest of his life in Rome, working for Pope Julius, and then after that, other popes in the church. Michelangelo lived to be very old. And so, anyway, Moses, and you can see pretty much all of the stylistic elements that go into Michelangelo's work, at least for a long time, for 40 years or so. I showed you before this, and the idea of this having exquisite, correct detail on the skeletal, muscular, even to the point where I would zoom in on here. Veins in the hands. I mean, you know, just incredible. See, this is in Florence. This is before the Pope got him. And Pope brought him to Rome and asked him to do this. Paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And so 1508, 1512, and this is it. This is one of the most celebrated, most revered artworks in the Western world. And a lot of what it even lasted so long that what we think about these biblical stories are really, in a lot of ways, framed on Michelangelo's depiction of these things. This is the creation of Adam, and this has been kind of disputed over time, but this is one of the central panels. If I go back here a little bit, let me show you. This is like the whole ceiling is the book of Genesis, is what this is. And this is, you'll see up here, if we could zoom in on this, Adam and Eve, the serpent, they ate from the tree, the fruit of knowledge, and they were cast out of Eden. So that's this whole story right there in that panel. Center panel, the creation of Adam. And do you notice anything different from this? And it's hard to see, but this was restored. And this is a restored version. And what happened, because this is such an important work of art, around the turn of the century, when you guys were like little babies and stuff, they opened this up, and the Mitsubishi Company of Japan, they make Mitsubishi cars, they finance World Heritage Restoration. Anyway, they financed this because what happened was that we had about 500 years of neglect on this. As you can see, this is a fresco right there. And you can see it's pretty large. It's, you know, 9.5 feet this way, 18, almost 19 feet lengthwise. So it's huge. It's a big panel. And so anyway, first of all, it's big and it's way up high. And this was like really quite a labor of love, I should say. But took Michelangelo, as you can see, a couple of years to finish it. And he had to climb up this scaffolding all the way up to the ceiling. And my bad. See, that's why I don't get mad at you guys, like if your phone goes off, you know. We have some teachers that do that. Well, anyway, it's like way up high, and he had carried his plaster and pigment up with him, way up onto the ceiling, and he painted it laying on his back. It was really quite an accomplishment. And you can see this is one panel, but this Sistine Chapel ceiling is huge. And so anyway, over 500 years, this really took a beating. First of all, it's right on the ceiling, and they had time, you know, over 500 years. They had times when the roof leaked and damaged this fresco from underneath. They had to clean off a lot of grime off of this, paint off of the whole ceiling. And it may sound kind of odd, but they burned candles in the Sistine Chapel. So you would think. So, but that smoke goes, though, that wax smoke goes all the way up to the ceiling. And if you did it a little bit, that wouldn't be so much, but 500 years of it is all this looked brown. You could not, it was to a point where it was really almost where you couldn't see exactly what it was. So anyway, these people got together and they restored it. They found that actually Michelangelo was even more of what we would call a colorist than we knew. We knew he was a great sculptor. When the Pope said, "Paint my ceiling," he objected, said, "I can't do this. I'm a sculptor. I'm not a painter." Said, "I'm the Pope. You're doing this." Boom, he was on it. But he actually was much more adept at color than what we knew. But this has sparked a lot of different interpretations. One is, as I just previewed you, the idea of this being the creation of Adam. It's been theorized with some visual evidence here that it wasn't really that God was creating Adam, but that God was giving Adam intelligence. Intelligence, the ability to think, the ability to have to realize your own existence is something that's, at least in theory, just in humans. Animals don't have that kind of self-awareness. They don't see themselves. They don't have the ability to do that. They don't, they're intelligent, to be sure, but in a whole different sort of way. So this is supposed to represent maybe the intelligence, because Adam, he's already been created. You see, he's there, he's got a body. This is the spark of intelligence. And these guys in Renaissance Italy were all about intelligence, knowledge, critical thinking, or we would call it today, knowledge. They wanted to be like the Greeks, pretty much genius. And that's what this is. And so there it is. This shape is theorized to be a brain. And you can say it's a brain sliced in half. Here's the creation of, the fall of man. And this is what I was telling you about right next to the creation of Adam. This is Adam and Eve. They eat from the fruit. There's the snake, the serpent that tempts them with the fruit, and angel comes down and casts them out of Eden. Libyan Sibyl, these are on the sides of the Sistine Chapel ceiling. And you can see, as I told you before about Raphael and Leonardo too, they had to kind of paint within the confines of the shapes and spaces and size of the walls. And you can see this vaulting here. That's actually this. And that's an architectural thing. And let me say, and find Libyan Sibyl. I think that's her right here. Anyway. At the beginning of the cleaning and restoration process, this is what I was talking about just a moment ago. All of the candle wax, the damage from humidity, time, leaky roofs, all that stuff. So this is what this looked like. And this is what it looked like after they restored it. And you can see they did really quite a good job on some of the restoration. They weren't really able to get rid of some of the cracking and things, but this is much, much brighter, much more vibrant, and more like the original paintings. And so after the completion of the cleaning and restoration process, and so that 1511, now we jump 25 years, 1536 to 41. And this is in the Sistine Chapel as well, but it's not the ceiling, it's the wall behind the altar. And if you take a close look at this, you can see there is the crucifix and the candles and so on. But this is like hugely different. And you see, this is like compositionally really chaotic and crowded. If you were to talk about this as a design, you'd say it's busy. And it's so busy, it's kind of hard to kind of figure out exactly what's going on. And like the School of Athens by Raphael, a lot of these figures represent contemporary 16th century Italian figures and figures from ancient Greece. But at any rate, this is the Last Judgment. And this is Christ. And there's the Virgin Mary, his mother, beside him. And you see all of these people down here, they're getting cast into hell. Now there's this kind of an interesting take on this, because see this area? What would that be? And I'll tell you, you won't find it in the Bible, but you will find it in Greek and Roman mythology. The river Styx, that when you die, you cross the river Styx into the afterlife. And this is really what that represents. So it's kind of this combination of Greco-Roman beliefs as well as biblical Christian beliefs. And so you can see here the devil and his minions, they're just casting these people down to hell. And if you don't go, I'm going to knock you down there. And one little kind of point of interest here, as I was saying, some of these figures are actually people, Italians, from ancient Greek and Roman history, and some of them are from contemporary Rome. And this figure right here, that's supposed to be Michelangelo's self-portrait. And what this is a story about a saint, a martyr, who was skinned alive. And that's what's here, the skin, the body's gone. And as terrible as it sounds, as terrible as it is, you can skin people just like they skin cows for leather. You know, if you cut this, you can just peel the skin. Anyway, that's him. That's Michelangelo. And this is behind the altar. So I want you to think about something here about this particular piece. The Last Judgment kind of reflects a shift in thinking. When you look up at the ceiling, it is celebrating the book of Genesis, and it's telling the story. But this is a stark reminder that everyone will die And if you're not right with God, or if you're not right with the church, you will end up here. A lot of these Last Judgment paintings are an object lesson on damnation and incentive to live your life as a good, straight, moral person. And so that's kind of, you know, he was a sculptor. This is I was going to show you this. This is the tomb of Giuliano de Medici, and bound slave, rebellious prisoner. And again, all of this muscularity, all of this passion, all of this emotion, it's the hallmark. And you can tell by, at least I hope you can, by how this is sculpted, this and these, as an explanation of how he painted the human figure too. And this is what the Last Judgment looks like inside the Sistine Chapel. Okay, so there were other artists of the time that were pretty accomplished. They learned all of the lessons. They knew how to paint. They knew how to create a naturalistic image, believable space, human beings that actually look like human beings, not flat cardboard cutouts of people. And so Del Sarto, Madonna of the Harpies. The Harpies are these guys right here. They're like little impish angels. And so anyway, but we got the Madonna just like we've seen before. And again, a kind of more human, not a stoic Madonna, but a Madonna that's that looks like a caring, good mother. And the Christ child here, and he's kind of a little bit apprehensive, would you say? A little bit scary. We would never have seen this 100 years prior. We would not see Christ as a baby at all. He would look like a small adult doing adult things like giving a blessing or holding a book which represented the Old Testament, and so on. Madonna of the Harpies. And again, I showed you a little bit about this, about tenebrism, the idea of darkening background to push the figures forward, to create kind of a deep space. So Del Sarto is right there with them as well. We have a stylistic change in architecture in the High Renaissance. And Tempietto, Donato D'Angelo Bramante. So what does this look like? This looks like something out of ancient Rome, if you will. If you had that class ADAH 100, you've seen a lot of structures that look like this with the Roman columns, the dome. This looks like it could have been 1,500 years older than it really is. But they really adapted like they did in sculpture. They looked towards the ancients and their architecture. And here's Bramante's design for St. Peter's. It's on a coin. Michelangelo, Buonarroti. I always have problems. That's the same Michelangelo that did the painting and the sculpture, and they employed him as an architect as well. And again, there was this kind of idea, St. Peter's with the dome, showed you that here. Michelangelo. So they started doing architecture for the church that looked more like ancient Roman architecture. And I might add that they didn't really see any contradictions here. If you go back a couple of hundred years, we're seeing Gothic architecture and the tall spires and this idea of a lot of stained glass windows, and it was its own architectural style, but they're going right back to classical Roman. And they had this as kind of a guiding idea too, that they thought mathematics was part of the laws that ruled, that govern human existence. And so as much as they are reliant on the Bible as those rules and laws that govern our existence, they really start making things that conform to understandable, very simple ratios. Things start to get, well, you see here, over these windows, a triangular pediment, an archway, triangular archway. All of the windows exactly the same distance apart, same amount of windows on either side. Perfect trilogy ratio 1, 2, and 3. That's a simple mathematic truth. And so this is still a little bit on the ornate and doesn't conform to ratios quite as well. But this is a typical Renaissance building. And they start building to geometry and the ratios and proportions. And here we go. This is the interior, the courtyard. And they have arches and triangular pediments. And then they have arches above the windows. Everything, it's got columns in between. It's all laid out in proportion. They follow simple Euclidean geometric ideas, truths, if you will. And so this, and you see even the patterning in the tile work here, it all converges on the center, but it's divided up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pieces, and etc. There's another Michelangelo stairwell. The idea that everything's plain, not too ornate, conforms to geometric ideals. And so anyway, that was the architecture. They kind of shift from, in a big way, to Gothic, to dome, classicalism, to basically a plain, simple, geometric, mathematical proportions. And this doesn't look like what I'm about to relate this to, but it does in its own way. In a lot of ways, these same ideas that govern how this was put together, you take a look at the White House in Washington, D.C., where Joe Biden lived there. Hold on, yeah. Anyway, you'll see if you take a close look at it, all the windows are like this. They're equally spaced, and they have these different kinds of pediments over the top, a triangular and arched, a triangular and arched. It's really quite similar to the kinds of architectural designs and layouts that we get in the High Renaissance. And so other painters, Bellini, again, the space, the naturalism. You guys remember what I said about this kind of stuff? Invented flora. They would kind of make up their own trees often. But here we go. Madonna and Child. Child, this is kind of a little bit of a throwback. Gotta given us a blessing here. But in a lot of ways, if you know the story of the nativity and the early life of Christ, you'll know that this is like pure fiction. Would you say? She's on a throne, Madonna enthroned. They've been doing that for centuries from the Byzantine times. But Christ, his mother Mary, Father Joseph, they were very ordinary people. They were nearly poor. He was a carpenter and he made tables and furniture and stuff, but they were not well-to-do and they weren't recognized by and large as being royalty, as you see this depicted here. And we got something, even a musician here, accompanying scholars. So it was foretold there would be a Christ. So Bellini, he knows how to make all of this illusionism. Bellini, this is an interesting piece here. I should have put a star by it. Feast of the Gods. Gods. More than one? Well, certainly not Christian then. As a Christian have one God. But this is right out of Greco-Roman lifestyle. Feast of the Gods, right out of their religion, right out, they got a warrior, and you got the sleeping young lady, a lot of bare-breasted figures, something of a bacchanal, a little bit of drinking too much reveling, and so on. And so anyway, this is, they're going back and forth with this. And as a matter of fact, The Tempest, Castelfranco, you can see the oncoming storm, see the Virgin, Child. Anyway, the oncoming storm, which is a sign of what lies ahead for the Christ child, which is eventually crucifixion. And so anyway, again, all of the things that make up Italian High Renaissance. Titian, Pastoral Symphony, another, what you might call a pagan scene. Young ladies dipping from the well, playing a flute, music. The men are clothed. I want you to remember this piece because this will come back in the 19th century as a critique on all of these kinds of values. I'll let you know when we get there. And so the Titian, there it is. Venus of Urbino. Venus, Roman goddess of beauty and love. And here she is. And again, see that dark wall right there? That's that thing I was telling you about, the tenebris and the contrast to help push the figures up forward. But, you know, very naturalistic, very much can handle painting all of the patterning on the sheets and the folds and the way light hits things, and a cute little dog right And these are what you would call attendants. They are basically servants there to do the bidding of Venus. Venus of Urbino. Urbino is a small town in Italy. And it's a prosperous town, and there's a lot of stuff that comes out of Urbino. But it's a little town, and Urbino means little town. Ever heard the term urban? That means city. Urbino, put the O, small town. Anyway, again, make this kind of flora. Moore, Titian, probably the best, most famous painter right after the High Renaissance. Lavinia, Montana. Put a star by this. National Museum of Women in the Arts. Of all of the things we've seen so far, we haven't seen women artists, and they're emerging. And I want to tell you this story. We believe, scholars believe, that there were many more women artists than we were previously aware of. And even at this time, they've been through research, scholars going back and researching this artwork, and they do more than just study the painting. They go to these places, and I have some friends that did some of this. They go to different places, like in the Vatican. Let's see who bought the paintings, who paid for the paintings and artwork and stuff. A lot of that transactional records, excuse me, are still on file in the Vatican. And they have in these places, like in Florence, Urbino, Rome, they have apothecaries, which is a name for a drugstore. But back in the 16th, 15th centuries, apothecaries sold drugs, remedies, and stuff like that, but they also sold pigments. And the pigments that would be used in making oil paint. And they still have in their records who bought this lapis lazuli, which is ground blue stone that was very popular to make blue pigment and thus blue paint. Go through the records and find out who was actually buying this stuff and who was actually making this stuff. And so, as we go on, we're going to start to see more and more women artists. We know women had a bigger role in the arts, but getting the proof, authenticating all this, it's really kind of it's a huge research project. And I know some people have been doing that, but this is one of the early ones, and we'll see more along the way. As a matter of fact, is my time as teaching art history, I've seen a lot of women artists uncovered. We've also seen a lot of women artists who took on the pseudonym, the artistic identity of men and stuff like that. So anyway, but at any rate, portrait of a noble woman, 1580. And so this is from, I should play it. This is from the
The thing that's different about a Virgo vacation home, you always have the whole place to yourself. No stranger with your
Wait a minute.
It's awkward. Or another room taking up space.
Vacation.
It's just.
There it is. Here's some of her work.
Bank of America Global Art Conservation Project began in 2010. We're now in our 9th year. Since we began, we've provided grants for conservation for 150 projects in 31 countries. The program is designed to shine a light on the need for conservation, to shine a light on different cultural traditions around the world. Every year, we try to have a balance of projects that includes many museums in many different countries. It's our second time partnering with the National Gallery of Ireland. It's a global bank. We have operations here. We have employees here. The National Gallery of Ireland has a tremendous collection. The people here are lovely to work with. The gallery comes up with wonderful opportunities for us to collaborate on. This project's exciting for many reasons. One, it's obviously a masterpiece. I mean, she's clearly a master at what she does. The fabrics, the richness of it, the beauty of it, the fact that it's telling a historical story in kind of Renaissance time, but a biblical story. And of course, there's mystery associated with it. It's also very exciting because she is a relatively unknown female Renaissance artist. I suspect that a lot of people don't think of there being such a thing as female Renaissance artist. And so this is her moment in my view.
Oh, no, not again. So that's what I was talking about insofar as I gotta make sure I got this screen share. That's right. No. Yeah. So that's what I was talking about, that these artists have been in recently, in some cases, uncovered. And I wanted you to kind of notice something. I hope you noticed that when they started talking about her mastery of painting, what did they look at? They look at the fabrics, they look at the patterning, lace, the pearls, all of that kind of stuff, which is what I've been talking about a lot too, because this is where they, those are the most challenging materials or subjects to actually paint in a believable way. And so, Titian, I told you about him, and Alma Il Giovanni, Pietà. And you see, this is what we've been saying, the dead Christ. And that too is a loaded image. We saw that, we've seen that a lot. We saw it with Michelangelo, magnificent Pietà. But, it is a stark reminder that Jesus died for you. And this is the grieving mother. And losing a child, they say, God forbid anybody have to go through that. But it says probably the worst grief one could imagine. And so anyway, there's some things going on here too that kind of portend what's going to happen in the next century. And that is this kind of zoom in on here because this is really pretty important. See, instead of painting, say, a halo around the Christ, we start to see this glow. We start to see light emanating. And that becomes a challenge for artists of the 17th century. They really try to figure out how to paint without using symbols, but trying to create, like in this case, a halo of light. And mannerism follows the High Renaissance. And it's typically a term used for these artists of Italy after we see the High Renaissance kind of fades away. Leonardo leaves France, he dies. Raphael dies. Michelangelo lives to be old, but he starts to change his style to be much more manneristic. And I'm going to run this all the way back. It's a lot of slides to go through. Yeah, this is the late Pietà. And it's exaggerated. I showed you this last week. And everything's elongated. Everything is much what you would call severe. It's a very unsettling depiction of the Pietà. This, much more naturalistic, the dead Christ, the grieving mother. This, look at the neck, it's hard to look at. And this is one of the effects of mannerism. We saw some of this change from this classical kind of Michelangelo to a much more severe depiction. It's all crowded, it's busy, it's overdone, and in a lot of ways it's pretty gruesome when you take a close look at it. So mannerism is kind of in that genre. Why? Why? Because there were a lot of artists who kind of realized that everything that could be done with naturalism had been done. We saw the great Raphaels, we've seen the Leonardos, we've seen all of this stuff that nobody could actually outdo. It was about as photographic or about as naturalistic as they thought humanly possible. And so what they started doing is taking some of those inventions of the Renaissance and really start to turn them around. Like I showed you, Michelangelo, the severe, elongated, very angular Pietà versus the more naturalistic Pietà. This, the entombment of Christ, but how many of you guys do design work? Gabriel. Okay, good. You guys will know what I'm talking about, because where's the focal point in this design? We've seen the focal point in the Renaissance, and all those orthogonals, those lines would go right to Christ. Everything would converge. Well, this would probably be the horizon line, and this would be the focal point, and it's basically empty. This is what you would call a radial composition. That is, that it goes around in a circle. You see that? All of the lines, the gestures, how the placement of the body is. It's a radio composition. This is mannerism. They start to exaggerate things, whether it's composition, whether it's angularity, whether it's somebody like Parmigianino, Madonna with the long neck. Not who it was, I got it written down. That's mannerism too. We'll jump to that. This is it. Parmigianino, Madonna with the long neck. Exaggerated, elongated. Look at how long this Christ child is. Look at, and it's called the Madonna with the long neck, and the neck is exaggeration. So you start to see all of these manipulations of the high Renaissance style, and they do other things with it. In this case, it's kind of an interesting composition. And then you got this leg here that's really kind of just frames all of this, but this composition would not exist in high Renaissance. And certainly the exaggerations that you see here. Bronzino, Venus, Cupid, Folly, and Time. This is kind of an interesting composition too. Doesn't really conform to those ideas of high Renaissance. And in fact, a lot of it, the space is not particularly that well defined. It's kind of flattened out in a lot of ways. But this, all of this stuff is really about having the use of metaphors and try to tell a tale or a morality story. And so Cupid, Venus, Cupid, Folly, and Time. Folly, this is Venus, that's Cupid. Anyway, basically a message that everybody will get old and your good looks will go away, and don't waste your time while you're young. All of these kind of messages were really associated with this. You see here, like we have these, like this head, it looks disembodied here. We see the mask, the idea of hiding yourself, your true self from others and things like that. It's all full of those kinds of messages. And so the radio composition, Bronzino, and again, they knew how to do all of the stuff that the high Renaissance artists did. The idea of the shine of the pearls, the patterning on the velvet dress and stuff like that. Bronzino, Portrait of a Young Man. Another very famous painting. And the idea that he's not kind of looking back. He's kind of thinking about something, not even looking back at the viewer. That's a kind of a break from traditional Renaissance. Another woman artist, Sofan Ispa, Anguissola. Portrait of the artist, sisters, and brother. Again, Anguissola not known until more recent time. All of that work, they just scratched the surface of on that film, but bottom line, we're starting to see women emerge and identify as some of the great artists of the time. And it does actually start to indicate at least some willingness and acceptance for gender equality. We haven't seen that so much in ancient Roman times, and we never would have heard of a woman being a sculptor, painter, architect. And so anyway, Fall of the Giants, this is really kind of a cool fresco. Taking all of this stuff they learned from the Renaissance and creating this fantastic scene. And you see underneath here, this is the fall. It's like almost like an earthquake or something happening. Columns are breaking, people are getting crushed under the rocks and things. And the gods from Mount Olympus, and the Greek idea. Watching as all this happens. Tintoretto. This is what I was saying earlier about that kind of way of portraying light. Tintoretto. Look at those light rays coming through like the wind coming through to something. Anyway, said Christ, check this out. This is not high Renaissance kind of realism, going back to a kind of more symbolic thing, but the idea of painting rays of light and how they shine or how they emanate from certain people. And this is the Last Supper, and you can see these are the disciples, and they have something of a little glow, but that's a whole different thing from what we saw pre-Renaissance, where they would have this large disc behind their head, indicating a halo. And so these are all issues. These are all changes in style. Veronese, Christ in the House of Levi. This is really kind of an interesting painting. And this is from Venice, by the way. And I'm going to zoom in because there are some really kind of interesting issues here. Like we have African people here. That's kind of interesting. And Christ in the House of Levi, but this is really a Last Supper scene. There's Jesus. And what do they have? Another African person here. See you later, Cat. And I'm looking for this one figure. Can't seem to find. There's a little person in here. Can't seem to find. Hope it's not cut off. But bottom line, got a dog here. Say just taking Renaissance methods, turning them on their ear, and in some cases to a point where they're actually ignoring all of this stuff. But they were using a lot of the same techniques, a lot of the same modeling, a lot of the same coloration, a lot of the same perspective to create these illusions. So in a nutshell, what we have, high discovery, high invention, high creativity in the high Renaissance. And then after that, people were just doing all kinds of things with what was discovered. Correggio, Assumption of the Virgin. Again, other sculptors of 16th century. And you can see this is late in the century and much more dramatic, much less worried about having a centralized composition. And again, they go full bore out for Greco-Roman architecture, and this looks like something that could have been in Rome, actually. Roman all over. And so I would like, oops, to show you. There it is. Oh, I gotta get the screen share thing going. Come on. We're good. Good. So Italy wasn't the only place. But I want to kind of throw this out. We were talking this whole time about the 16th, 15th, late 15th, early 16th century, which is the late 1400s and the 1500s. So what was happening politically, what was happening with governments, what was happening on the world stage, outside of the arts, just say it. 1492, Columbus bumps into America. What some of my Native American friends say, the Columbus was the lost Italian because he was trying to find Asia. But just say it. Bottom line, it's all this stuff is kind of written from, a lot of the history is written from the European perspective, but bottom line is that we had Spain here. That's what we're going to be looking at here pretty soon. Spain was, in essence, a world power by then. They built a large navy, they built a large trade network, and they sent Columbus west to get to the Eastern Hemisphere, if you will. Well, what he did, he ran, as you know, ran into North America. But Columbus was not a Spaniard. He was from over here. He was from Italy. And Ferdinand and Isabella hired him to do this because Italy, all of this art stuff is just really kind of one piece of the knowledge, math, scientific skills and knowledge they had in Italy. So they had to hire an Italian to pull this off. King and Queen of Spain, Christopher. Here, I'll give you these three ships. You go, come back. Anyway, there were a lot of things going on just like that. Not only was Italy the sort of the art capital, but it was kind of like the Silicon Valley of its day. It's where all the technology was coming out of. It was where a lot of the knowledge was. And so anyway, we'll see some of that play out here in Spain. And so I'm going to kind of jump ahead here because here it is. This guy, He becomes sort of the, see, 1610, Spain. This is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And this is in Toledo, Spain. El Greco. In Spanish, that means the Greek. And his name, he had a real name, but that's what he's known as, is El Greco. So not only was Spain hiring people to explore the world for them, they were hiring architects, they were hiring artists and all kinds of things. So anyway, that being said, okay, I got 5 minutes. Tell you about the 4th guy who is now considered to be one of those high Renaissance artists. That's this guy, Albrecht Dürer, self-portrait, 1500. You can see the skill. And he painted himself, and he's got his name there. I'm Albrecht Dürer. I painted this in the year 1500. There's my signature. Albrecht Dürer, 1500. Amazing. He's somebody too that learned from all of the discoveries of the Renaissance. And he kind of put a lot of the knowledge about art making and a lot of attitudes about art making and applied them. And he's from Germany. This is actually in Munich, where this painting is. And so he was the other guy, like Leonardo, like Raphael. He's a contemporary. And he applies all of those things that they learned in the previous century towards his art. But he kind of spreads out in a different sort of way. We saw Michelangelo do sculptures, fresco paintings on the ceiling. We saw Michelangelo do architecture. Leonardo did a lot of different things. This guy actually was a scientist, more like Leonardo than any of the rest of them. And this is called a great piece of turf. It's a watercolor. It's not that big. It's only about 15 inches high. But the value of this is that he painted the flora, and he painted a lot of animals too. He painted nature. And so we can tell by looking at his paintings what kind of plants and what kind of animals existed 500 years ago. Some of these things are extinct. Some of them have changed over time. Bottom line, he's a scientist. He approaches this with the same kind of scientific accuracy as did Leonardo da Vinci. And he was a printmaker. The fall of man, Adam and Eve. And see, he's always kind of egoist here. I want to zoom in because it says Albrecht Dürer. And he's got his, I did this in 1504. Adam and Eve, there's a little bit more modesty here. Put a little fig leaves over there, in private parts. Up on private. Bottom line is that he's a printmaker, he does watercolors, he does paintings, and he does drawings. And they range a broad spectrum of things. And so there's another Albrecht Dürer print, his prints. There are many of them. A print of a rhinoceros, 1515. Some of these things I was talking about, he painted animals, but sometimes he only could paint animals from description. some explorer would go to a place where rhinoceri would be part of the natural fauna. Bottom line, they'd have a description and he'd go with the description and create his version of a rhinoceros. So it's not always exactly scientifically accurate, but and one last thing. You know, I could talk like for days on this stuff. Right. Can't ask you to stay. I want to show you this. To me, this embodies the schism, the difference, the gulf of philosophy and Christianity between Italy and Northern Europe. Now we see some of that happen with mannerism, but bottom line is this. Nice greenwald, an altarpiece, the crucifixion. Look at those hands. Look at the Christ. He's like emaciated. His hands, agony. You know, I'm saying about how the Pietà is a reminder that Christ died for you. They take this to extremes. Christ died a very painful death for you. And so they have a different way of looking at Christianity that we'll talk about when we come back. Okay, so that's what I have for you today. Thanks. And anyway, we'll see you later. You bet. See you later. Go Chiefs. In